It's a warm summer morning in 1879, and we're on the sandy shore of downtown Wayzata, watching over a group of tourists looking to board one of Lake Minnetonka's finest steamers. Our intent is to ride with them from their port in Wayzata to Upper Lake, where we'll stop for a picnic before heading further west to meet up with friends for a dinner party at a hotel in Cook's Bay. Unfortunately, and unbeknownst to them, our party won't be arriving in time for dinner. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your friend Nathan Hofer with the Minnetonka Minute, and today I'm here to tell you the story of a boat destined to go down in our history as a disaster that was likely to have been completely avoidable. Ignorance, tragedy, and a damage to her industry, this is the story of the steam ferry May Queen. Also, if you like history made bite-sized and exciting, feel free to subscribe to this, the Minnetonka Minute, because we have so much to offer and so does Lake Minnetonka. You won't want to miss any of what's in store. Anyway, on with the video. Ordered for construction in the early 1870s by locally renowned Captain Charles May, the gears were set in motion for a most historic vessel. Captain May would place the order for his new ship to be built by Wayzata boat builder Nathaniel Harrison. Harrison was a well-known boat builder and certainly up for the task to build one of Lake Minnetonka's largest boats to date. Harrison's work came to completion in the spring of 1874, and the new ferry was launched into the lake on June 24th of that year. The vessel would be named May Queen, as a nod to her owner's name. Charles May saw that his boats bore names like Mayflower, Katie May, and, of course, May Queen. That may sound somewhat pompous to us today, but it's difficult to understate how successful Charles May would become in the lake's shipping industry, a legacy that was started with his boat, the May Queen. May Queen was a well-fitted boat, measuring in at 66 feet in length and 14 in width. She was fitted with a 25 horsepower steam engine and a coal-burning boiler built by the Ames Iron Works Company in Oswego, New York. Standing 15 feet above her deck were two cabins, all painted in a bright white scheme. The total cost of construction was $6,000, or roughly $170,000 today. She was easily the fastest boat on Minnetonka at the time and likely one of the most luxurious. A trip aboard the May Queen would start in Wayzata and speed toward Excelsior. From there, she'd go through the Narrows Channel into Cook's Bay and stop at one of the two hotels in the area where you'd disembark for a 4-hour visit. While visiting the hotel, you'd be served dinner before boarding back onto the boat and heading for Wayzata. The price for this experience was an incredible $2. From 1874 to 1879, the May Queen served along her running mates in a relatively unremarkable fashion, ferrying tourists to and from the many grand hotels along the lake's shore. Her only hiccup in life had been during an attempt to take her down the Minnehaha Creek to the Minnetonka Mills. Not far into the creek, she'd run aground and had to slowly back her way back into the lake. Despite a good career and financial success, there were likely issues bubbling under the surface across Captain May's entire Minnetonka fleet. Workers aboard the May Queen and other boats were reporting issues with their respective vessels' boilers. You see, to operate a steamboat, coal is burned inside a large boiler where water is superheated until it becomes steam. This pressurized steam is sent off into the engine where it will run through its pistons in order to rotate the ship's propellers. To successfully pull this off, the boiler must be capable of withstanding a tremendous amount of pressure from within. The trouble with many of Captain May's ships were that their boilers were all showing signs of giving way to the pressurized steam within. Reports from the ship's engineers even went as far to say as they knew the boilers were in bad shape. Reporting back to Captain May, the issues aboard his boats were largely unchecked. As time went on, the boilers began to crack at their casing and developed blisters where the iron was being deformed by excess pressure. Some engineers working aboard these boats would eventually refuse to come into work altogether out of fear that the boilers could explode at any time. Then, barely more than 5 years after her initial launch, disaster would permanently mar the lake's shipping industry. A disaster that would come aboard the May Queen along with 18 unsuspecting individuals. And this is where we found ourselves in the opening of today's video. On the morning of June 28, 1879, the May Queen tied to the dock at the Shady Isle Hotel for passengers to enjoy a short picnic. The hotel, situated on a property owned by the boat's captain, William Rockwell, was a grand one and certainly worth the short visit. After the picnic wrapped up, all the passengers reboarded and settled into the May Queen's cabins just shy of 12 o'clock in the afternoon. Captain Rockwell untied his boat and stepped aboard her bow, shouting the order to back her away from the dock. The boat's engineer, Mr. N.F. Haynes, immediately executed the captain's order, and as the engine was shifted to reverse, a sudden, distinct cracking sound could be heard by all aboard. In a fraction of a second, the ferry's boiler suddenly exploded in a tremendous way, and all aboard the vessel, save for one woman, were shot into the air with the remains of the May Queen's boiler. Captain Rockwell landed in the old hull of a nearby tugboat, and at the same time, a woman and her 2 children were sent flying from within the cabin to the water below. Others landed all around in water that was roughly 4 to 5 feet deep. The boiler itself was sent flying with such a tremendous force that it broke through 2 tree trunks, each being 12 or more inches in diameter, before being partially buried in the sandy embankment of the island. Within a moment, what remained of the May Queen slipped beneath the waves next to the dock, the only truly recognizable part of the ferry being the bow and wheelhouse, which had been well away from the boiler situated amidship. As onlookers realized the scale of the calamity that had unfolded on shore, they rushed to the scene and helped the May Queen's ejected passengers back to land. Many were severely injured, but somehow no one was killed in the explosion. As the day came to a close, the afflicted passengers were tended to and found to be in varying conditions. One woman laid in bed, unable to move, claiming that her shoulder and chest had significant pain. Captain Rockwell, who was standing again outside on the bow, sustained minor injuries, but no broken bone or lung damage. Others, such as a young boy who was traveling with his father, sustained no injuries at all from the blast or the subsequent ejection from the stricken ferry. However, it was the ship's engineer, Mr. Haynes, who had been situated directly next to the boiler, that was in the worst condition of them all. The following morning, a reporter at the St. Paul Daily Globe would write this. Now, before I continue, I should warn you that this is somewhat graphic and viewer discretion is advised. His injuries are of such a precarious nature as to almost prelude the hope of recovery. Badly scalded from the waist up, the appearance of Haynes is that of a livid mass of parboiled flesh, and, under the circumstances, his recovery would be quite miraculous. His breathing today was forced and exceedingly heavy, and during the poor fellow's incoherent ravings was distinguished the following remark.
Guessed was a little hole in the boiler.
Like the reporter suspected, Mr. Haynes would not survive his injuries. He had been working aboard the May Queen for only a month. His brother, who had come from Minneapolis to tend to his injuries, would pay a visit to the Daily Globe reporter on the dock while he was jotting notes about the May Queen's wreckage laying in the water. The brother, Mr. O.F. Haynes, was a blacksmith by trade and came to the reporter with a handful of bolts recovered from the stricken ship's boiler. Upon inspection, the metal was clearly so brittle that it could be broken with just their bare hands. The reporter compared the damaged metal to being, quote, as brittle as cast iron. Later, he was called over to the boiler itself. A crack spanning nearly 2 feet across its iron plating was easily noticeable. In the time after the May Queen's explosion, many Minnetonka residents took to writing petitions to the Secretary of the Interior, requesting that laws be enacted to have steam boilers on inland vessels like the May Queen inspected on at least a somewhat regular basis. By this time, the May Queen was one of only a handful of boats to have exploded due to faulty boilers or improperly trained crew. What's worse is that she wouldn't be the last. By the end of the 1880s, it was thought that some 50% of all passenger ferries would explode while working on the lake. The May Queen's wreck remained in shallow water off Shady Island for about a month before being removed from the lake entirely. Interestingly, her engine was deemed to be in good enough condition to go back into service. It was removed by Charles May from the bottom of Lake Minnetonka and sent to Lake Okoboji in Iowa. Surprisingly, May owned a small handful of boats here as well, despite living in Excelsior and owning a sawmill in town. May Queen's engine would be placed into a steamer by the name of the Ben Lennox. On Okoboji, May's new boat would launch in 1884 and sail until 1893. He then rebuilt the boat, keeping her hull and engine, and renaming it Manhattan. This boat sailed until 1899. By then, the hull had become terribly rotten and the Manhattan was deemed unsalvageable. The ship was sold off and scrapped, but again, the May Queen's old engine was removed from the Manhattan and placed into an entirely new ship, the Okoboji. This boat sailed well into the 1920s before being dismantled, bringing an end to the final living piece of the May Queen. For Minnetonka residents today, many steamers of the era are often forgotten by all but the most avid local historians. Such is the case for May Queen, which had an otherwise unremarkable career. Had she not exploded, I doubt she'd be little more than a footnote in the long lineage of steamers on Minnetonka and essentially lost to history. But that's not the case. The May Queen is relatively well documented by historians thanks to news articles of the time and writings of the locals who were privy to the events as they unfolded. As a result, future generations of Lake Minnetonka have had much to go on when reading the story of May Queen and those who made up her crew. While she had far from the most tragic ending to a boat on Minnetonka, she was nonetheless worthy of documenting and worthy of remembrance. Thanks for watching this video. The Minnetonka Minute and Remember Wednesday is researched, written, and produced by me, Nathan Hofer. Want to learn more about Lake Minnetonka history? Then consider subscribing to the Minnetonka Minute for regular updates on historical figures, events, locations, and stories. As well, feel free to leave a comment below. I pride myself on responding to your feedback and take everything into consideration when producing these videos. For a bibliography of sources used in the making of this video, check out the description below. Once again, this is the Minnetonka Minute, and I hope to see you soon.